Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Batman Arkham Origins. I played it on the PC this time around, but I have played it on the PS3 and 360. Which, unfortunately, that's about the only way you can play it because it's not backwards compatible for whatever reason, but okay, let's go. So why am I reviewing it now? Well, because I remembered it took place around Christmas, but then I remembered I was doing Cyberpunk 2077 on Christmas, so whatever. So as you can guess, you play as Batman, and as I stated, it takes place on Christmas. Black Mask is breaking into Blackgate Prison, and, well, Batman decides to stop him. Upon doing so, he runs into Killer Croc, who breaks the news to Batman that Black Mask has hired several hitmen to try and kill him. So Batman has to set out to stop these hitmen, and the hitmen include some lowballers like Electrocutioner, but up to guys like Deathstroke and Bane. And as the story goes on, you find out a few things like, Black Mask isn't really Black Mask, he's the Joker. I mean, don't get me wrong, Black Mask is in the game, actual Black Mask, but the Black Mask who hired hitmen is the Joker. But I do like the story. I think they tell some interesting things. It's obviously an origin story, and it does take inspiration from The Killing Joke in regards to the Joker's origin. But it gives you the origins to a bunch of different characters. It explains a variety of things, including how Bane became the Bane we know in the Arkham universe. And overall, I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with it. I also really like the DLC. It's the Cold Cold Heart story, which is a retelling of how, Mr. Freeze became Mr. Freeze and Batman's, first time facing him. Which I thought was really cool. I really enjoyed that DLC, and I think it fits well with the whole Arkham Origins theme. The story they tell is good. I actually think it's a well-done story. I won't say it's quite as good as, the other games, but I do think it's a good story nonetheless. Now let's get into the audio, and we'll start with the voiceover work, which I've got to say, it obviously feels different because you don't have the same voice actors. Kevin Conroy is not doing Batman, and Mark Hamill is not doing the Joker. So obviously that feels weird immediately, but I will say, I think they did good jobs. The voice actors did a fantastic job, and I think Troy Baker is often overlooked for his portrayal of the Joker. And I think it's unfair to shit on him for it because it's not like he got to be his own version of the Joker. He had to play off of Mark Hamill's version because it does take place in the same universe. His Joker is the same Joker as Mark Hamill's Joker. And quite frankly, I think he did a really good job. I personally think he's one of the better Joker voice actors we've had. Obviously, he doesn't match Mark Hamill, but that's because Mark Hamill's Joker is iconic. I mean, in all variations of the Joker, I always think of Mark Hamill's Joker first. He is the number one in my mind. When I read Batman comics, he is the voice of the Joker in my mind. So it is unfair, in my opinion, to shit upon Troy Baker for what he did with the role. That being said, I think the voiceover work is good. Like, the quality of it is excellent. I think they do a good job. As for the sound effects, I think the sound effects are well done in this game. I mean, it's nothing new or magical. It's nothing you hadn't heard in the previous two games, but I think it's good and I think it's well done. As for the music, once again, it does feel like great Batman music, so there's nothing to complain about there. Now let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and this is an open world third-person beat-em-up action with RPG elements type of game. God, when am I gonna stop adding RPG elements? Because that's just a thing every game has anymore. I will say it does do a few things that are different from the previous games. You do have to basically unlock the fast travel ability. You have to go to towers that have been taken over by the Riddler and take them back for the city, essentially. And that then allows you to fast travel. That's really the biggest difference to, I hate to make the comparison, but Arkham City. Because your movement system is basically the same. You glide around a lot, you run around on rooftops, you use your grappler, etc. Now that being said, like any of the Batman games, you have your main missions and you have a lot of side missions. As I mentioned, there's the Riddler ones, of course, but there are also assassins that you don't actually have to go after, so they become kind of optional, so you can go and do that. Well, actually, I guess it's really only one of the assassins is optional. But there are all sorts of other things. There are definitely more investigations than some of the previous games, and I think that is one thing that Arkham Origins did better than the previous two games. And that is using the whole detective mode thing. The crime scenes you do are much more elaborate, they're more involved, and I really liked that about this game. I always felt that it was kind of a wasted potential thing in the first two Batman games. That being said, the combat does not necessarily stand out. It's very much what you are used to, except for the addition of the electric gloves. Those are probably one of the more disappointing elements in the game, because while it's cool that they really make you OP and in very large groups, they're beneficial, but up against smaller groups, they do the game actual harm, I would say. Because they immediately put all enemies in that stunned and down position, if there's not enough people that you can keep bouncing around on, you're guaranteed to lose your combo, and that's just frustrating. And that actually really does detract from the combat in those situations, and once you figure it out, yeah, it's fine, you just don't use it, but it's annoying up until then when you're figuring that out. As for the stealth, which is still there, I think it kind of isn't as good. In certain areas, it works just as well, it works pretty much exactly like you're used to, but there are certain areas that just clearly were not set up for it, but then they put those stealth predator sections in there and they just feel like shit. And I also want to put out there is one side mission involving the Mad Hatter, and that mission a lot of it feels really derivative of the first game with the Scarecrow mission. It was disappointing. They could have done something a little more unique with it, but there are parts that felt like they were basically just stripped out of that. Another thing that became more and more of a pain in the ass in the game, the further you get, is more and more of the rooftops are manned by thugs, but thugs with guns. So, grappling up to those roofs and gliding over them, you get shot a shit ton for no goddamn reason, and it gets really obnoxious. But overall, I think the mechanics and whatnot work. They are pretty good for the most part. They are not quite as good as previous Batman games. Now let's get into the controls, which I'm gonna say they work pretty well. They don't work as well as I would like. For some reason, despite the fact the blueprints are there and they were basically using assets that already existed, it's weird that the controls aren't as good. There were definitely times where in combat I know I pressed the button to guard and it was like, nah, fuck you, you didn't. There were definitely times where I know I was dodging and it went, nah, you didn't. And yeah, those things did absolutely lead to my death. As for the movement, generally speaking, it works pretty well, except for when you're doing the investigation mode, which, like I said, I like the investigation mode more. But it feels kind of weird and floaty, and sometimes it's hard to manipulate Batman in the way that you want to. So unfortunately, somehow the controls in this game just aren't as good. Now let's get into the graphics and visuals, and I gotta say, I think it's a good looking game. It actually still holds up pretty well. I was really actually impressed by that. And quickly, before I get into the rest of it, there is one point where they have like a version of Batman, and I love it. It's a hallucinatory version of Batman, and it looks like Raziel from Soul Reaver, which I love because I thought that was a dope ass design. But let's get back to the actual visuals, which, like I said, are pretty good looking. I think they did well. Yes, the roadmap was already there for these characters, but I think they did a good job bringing that to life, even though they're not the original studio. You can definitely see how their Joker grows into the Joker that we know as he ages. You can definitely see all the influences from the original games, but they kind of took it and made it their own, made it a bit younger, considering that, you know, Batman and Alfred and Bane and the Joker and everybody, they're younger, so they did a good job doing that. I also think the world that they built, I really liked the winter vibe of it. I thought they did a good job with the snow effects for the most part. I think they did good, I should say. And you can also tell that this is early on, before Batman was heavily customizing all of his stuff. The Batplane doesn't look quite like you expect it to at this point, but you know, it's still very early on. To put it simply, I think the visuals are a really strong element of this game. I think they did a good job making everything feel like it's an earlier version of what you see later. But let's wrap this up. I'm gonna say that overall, I think they did some elements very well, but there are definitely things that detract from the overall experience. And while I feel like this game gets a lot of unneeded hate, I definitely don't feel like it's the strongest in the franchise by any stretch. That being said, if it's on sale on Steam, I don't see any reason not to pick it up and have a good time. So I am recommending it, but on sale for sure. Okay, so in the comments down below, why don't you tell me, are you excited for Gotham Knights? I'm cautious. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share it and subscribe. Have a good one. But let's get back to the actual visuals that matter. And I gotta say, so I am recommending it. Blah, blah, blah.